Say it now.
Nah, I'm all good.
All right, I'm started recording.
Is this all good?
Yeah.
Bro,
this
it's if anyone who's listening already, if this ends up going on the episode, just know that if we're not at our best, it's so hot in here, man, and the air conditioner's not working.
Yeah, so we spent. Okay, I'll give a bit of context because I came here at 5 p.m. and then I'm like trying to turn on the aircon and then I realized it's not turning on. I'm like, what the heck? I spent like 45 minutes just trying to like play around with the buttons
bro,
and everything.
It was literally,
and it was like working for a bit and then it didn't work. I'm like, I can't be stuffed. I'm just gonna ask the boys when they come. And then they come and then
we took it apart to try and clean the filter, and it turns out we just didn't have it on the cold button.
Is it working? It's not working.
Well, I mean, it's not working now, but it will.
It will. Have
Optimism. Be
That's
optimistic.
it. Have
Tanzim.
tawakkul.
I believe that it'll work, so it'll work. A'udhu billah.
I think
Allah
therefore I
determines
am.
if it works, yeah.
As
This is the manifestation that the kids are being taught these days.
yeah, that's society and culture nowadays. You know, just optimism, bit of JP. You
But
know,
it's not optimistic
about-
at all, man. I don't think kids these days are optimistic. They all seem like really sort of down, and I don't know. Their TikToks are always like
are you speaking from experience?
dank memes, and like, bro, dank memes probably 5 years old. I'm showing my age now, but like they're all kind of, I don't know. There's like a glorification of sadness in this generation.
Is it?
Yeah, you don't think so?
In some ways, yeah. In some ways, like I don't know. I think in love music, I think there's a lot of sadness, and yeah, like jamming to it. You know, when I'm in the fields, some Drake when I'm driving home from work. In the alone vibes.
Is Drake like the exception to the rule though in terms of his music, like his content? I don't know. I feel like he's notoriously sort of nostalgic and
Yeah, 100%.
does a lot of lamenting. Every time I hear a car outside, I get excited because I think it's the air conditioner starting up. And by the way, when we say it's hot, like it's not like England hot. Like it's actually
So with
hot in
the-
Australia. Like it's actually hot, guys.
So we may have some listeners that are like, oh, what, they're gonna get into temperaments. I can't help it because I mentioned it before the podcast. Like we're talking about heat, body warmth.
Yeah.
If you don't like the temperaments, then like
Just leave.
why are you
So
listening?
okay, so we have So if we talk about
we know it's echo
Sufi,
chamber.
any we talk about something Sufi related or we're talking about temperament related, or something political. I think it's like a sieve thing, like a sieve where like the Salafis will stop listening because we talk about Sufism. It's like the sieve, and then when they're
Yeah,
gone,
sieve with
then we get rid of the anti-4T people. They're they we just flush them out, So we have this like core fan base of listeners that are like 4T Sufi Islamists, basically. What else is missing? Leftists, like hardcore leftists, woke culture,
the,
all about woke culture,
But we're not woke
all about
enough.
Marxism.
We're not woke enough, really. Like, I'm pretty sure if someone was actually woke and they listened to the podcast, like I've said enough stuff on this podcast to definitely get cancelled. So like, you can't be too woke. is my
No,
point.
but I found some like very woke people don't really like temperaments either. So it's
but
as I said, it's like a sieve. You get to this like
that's it.
niche group of listeners that like all of them at once.
Yeah, we should change the podcast from like Boys in the Cave to be like temperaments and temperaments to soul work
and Edward Said in the
in
cave.
Boys
yeah.
in the Cave to boys that exactly match Tanzim's niche interests.
Yeah,
Like,
you
You have to explicitly like Sufism, temperaments.
yeah.
Yeah, when
Or else we don't want you
You're
here.
saying with the save, I reckon 80% of people just stop listening.
There's always
They
those like contrarian types
believe in
though,
science.
who
this,
listen
that,
to
but
refute us.
Like, nah, what's all this personality categories types? Yeah,
Yeah, I think
a lot of people have that. At first
why box people into 4 categories? Like people are much deeper and
Yeah, bro. Why are there only
why
two genders,
are you
bro?
boxing people in, bro? Like just
There's
stop.
there's
Like,
more than 2 genders.
Bro,
There's more
yeah.
than 4 temperaments. Like, guys, come
human
on.
existence is so diverse, bro. Like, why 4?
Yeah,
that's what
explain.
they're-
Tell me.
Yeah.
I'll be like, what would your response be to that? I'll be like, like, are you saying like what? So there's no like 4 khulafa. Is it meant to be like 20 khulafa? Like
Well, if you ask the Shia, there's meant
So, what would your response be to that?
what to the 4 thing?
Yeah.
So
Let's
like
say
there's
citizens.
different. So like people think it's like static, right? But like within temperaments, it's like someone that's like melancholic, right? It's gonna be some melancholics are a bit more melon than choleric, and another melancholic can be a bit more to the choleric side than the melon. So it's not like everything's. It's like, for example, you see trees, right? We use the word trees, but there's different sizes of different trees, and like or like water, right? It can be phlegmatic, but there can be hot water and cold water, right? You get what I'm saying? So
mm,
like, there's
mm.
shades of it. So it's not like, you know, you are sort of, there is that boxing in element, but it's not like,
Nah, it's not at
it's a
all.
lot more
There's
diverse
a
than
more
people
simple way
think.
to
Yeah.
explain it though. Like when you
All right, go for it,
when
mate.
you
Just
explore, yeah.
shut me down. That's it. Yeah, that's what friends are for. Go on, brother.
I feel like that was unnecessary. No, it's as simple as in you're measuring people according to 4 characteristics: hot, cold, wet, dry. That's it. So if you measure according to those characteristics, you're going to be somewhere in that quadrant, in one of
Yeah.
those 4 quadrants. That's it. They're not saying that every person is the same, but you're somewhere in relation to those 4 poles. Those 2 axes or those 2 poles. And
Yeah,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. You talk about it, when the ulama talked about it. I think I sent you some stuff, like Ibn Hindu and the likes. They spoke about people in terms of excessive dryness, excessive wetness, and excessive hot, excessive cold, or a lack of one or the other. So when they were talking, they weren't necessarily be like, "Oh yeah, Josh, he's a choleric. You know, he's the clear cut choleric melon." They wouldn't necessarily talk like that always. They'd be like more as if, "Oh, Josh, I see you have excessive hotness. Like you have excessive heat. Your temperament is one of excessive heat, and it would be partially like a predisposition that you have, and then also your environmental factors that exacerbate that." So when the ulama talked about it, they didn't necessarily just constantly, like, they weren't going around with like a, you imagine those little spinning things. It's like, which temperament is he? And then they spin it and they like land.
Yeah, like
arrow
Wheel of
lands.
Fortune.
Yeah.
And then you get one and you win the prize.
Or it's like, have you ever seen Divergent, that movie where you get assigned like a role for life? So there's like the law people, and then there's like the soldier people. And it's like when you get typecast, that's it. You can't change.
Yeah.
It's not like that either. It's not like we're like, okay, Mr. Choleric Josh over here, yeah, he's choleric. He'll always be, he's just always going to be a hothead. That's it. Like, it doesn't work that way, you know. It's there are many different.
And obviously
influences.
because we're doing through the classes as well, like age plays a factor, gender plays a factor into the temperament. So like someone that's in the youth stage of their life is going to be a bit more sanguine as compared to the later stages of one's life, a bit more phlegmatic and chill. So, you know,
That's
there's
it.
that kind of, you know, interplaying, you know, those kind of diversity within the temperament. So it's a very like deep topic, and it takes, you know, proper research and study. But going back to, I think, our earlier conversation about
Me cutting
heat.
you off.
No, the heat, like someone's like hot in a room, and what kind of temperament is more likely to feel really hot in a room compared to, you know, someone of maybe a phlegmatic nature? Because, for example, in the sort of books I was reading as well, they're talking about how, for example, the phlegmatic temperament from memory will feel colder more quickly, like on their hands and feet, and compared to other temperaments as well. So there's that kind of contrast, and we know, and I've personally experienced this myself. Like melancholics tend to get really cold a lot quicker. So there's stuff like that, which is really fascinating, and it's like it's a whole world, right? And it's about doing its due diligence and not just kind of shutting it down, because we always go back to like our scholars and our Islamic scholars that really took from it and you know, used it and utilized it, and it's part once I was talking to someone, like once you encounter this literature and our scholarship of our Islamic scholars, they've written and, you know, really drawn from it in instances where, for example, if you read the word temperament or mizaj, you'd assume it's just like, for example, you know, in cricket, people talk about, oh, look, his temperament's not that good. Like, you just kind of think of it, oh, temperament meaning like his, I don't know, his mindset, right? Like, that's kind of how you interpret the word, right?
Yeah.
But then once you actually have a proper knowledge of the 4 temperaments, and then you realize when these scholars are using the word mizaj and temperament, it's not just like how we kind of put it in the Western world, it's just like a mindset or a personality. It's a lot more deeper. So like they're actually talking and referring to specifically the 4 temperaments, but we sort of gloss over it and don't really encapsulate the whole meaning of the words that they, you know, wrote about. So like that for me has given me a big opening after learning the temperaments and going back to those sort of instances where scholars mention it. Because like even in, for example, like so many examples, not even just Sufi texts, but like in tafsir, like I've seen it come up. I was like really fascinated. I'm like, well, they're actually talking about fire, earth, air, water. Like, what's this, you know? And once you have that, like, okay, they're actually referring to that. It's like saying, like, when you read, for example, I don't know, a science paper now, and they're talking about gravity, and let's just say the concept of gravity didn't even exist, like, I don't know, 100,000 years ago, right? And someone kind of read that paper, I don't know, gravity is seeing, like, I don't know, it's sort of translating to a different word, like things going down or whatever. And then you read that thinking, oh, it's just things going down, but it's like a lot more deeper kind of, field that needs to be understood in order to really understand what the person was saying. So basically my kind of perspective on it is like, before kind of shunning it, at least understand that our scholars drew upon it and used it. And it's about understanding the cosmology of our scholars and the way that they were kind of perceiving and thinking about things of their time, and then drawing from it and taking from that and really understanding the root of that. So
if you do actually want to come with a criticism, then you have to go into I mean, I'm going to go full trad bro on everyone, yeah? Go into our history and go into our text and our literature. Find examples of people who are critical of it in antiquity and in the, pre-modern Islamic sort of intellectual circles and discussions, and then bring that up. Because otherwise, if you can't find any evidence of critique or of suspicion about what we now refer to as the 4 temperaments, then it's basically a very modernist sort of 21st or 20th century, like almost arrogant dismissal of something
and it's
that
lazy.
was intrinsic.
It's just being lazy,
but,
right?
But it's like this was a part of our tradition. It's a part of the way that our scholars discussed and described people. You're gonna come along now and say, "Oh, the way they all did it was wrong. Oh, they were all idiots."
You become like almost that kind of Orientalist perspective.
That's exactly what I was
right?
alluding to without getting there. Yeah.
Just to take it back to your gravity point, because I was thinking of the original question, like people who believe in science that would dismiss the idea of temperaments completely. What would our response be? So I reckon referring back to tradition is great. Sort of like Islam accepted this in the past, but the angle that I would take is more so like a Akida, philosophy of science angle. It's we would turn the question back on them. Is be like, why are you seeking a scientific truth in meaning? Why is only like a clearly defined concept have to be scientific? It's like meaning. Why do you believe in the Quran then? That's not scientific either. There's meaning through grappling with the gray areas of a concept.
Isn't it? It's a very post-structuralist.
Yeah,
approach,
exactly.
right?
It's like
it's really fascinating.
It's like the fact that a believer in science would shun it. It shows that you place your faith in science only as a source of truth. So you're the one that's showing yourself to be a materialist here, right? Whereas,
that's dope, yeah.
Whereas as Muslims, we believe truth is not only in the material, empirically observable. It's also in the extra material, which is the concept of the ruh, concept of the soul, concept of the afterlife, the ghaib, this, that. So why would you dismiss a concept that the scholars use to describe the soul, right? Temperament is our beings, right? And they said this is like a perfect way to describe the different archetypes of people. So as in that's how I take it. It's like you're dismissing a knowledge, then why do you even believe in God? Because that's also beyond the material, right? Why do you believe in revelation? It's like a similar concept in that regard. It's like extra material, beyond the super material, right? Beyond the material. As in this is obviously for the question that initially we posed of people who say, "Oh, it's not scientific. It's not worth our time," right?
Yeah. No, that was super. Okay.
Yeah,
that was
well
a very
articulated.
good, mashallah. And just to add
That's
to
just
your
how my
point-
mind operates.
No,
on
that's
it.
really good because it's kind of feeding into the that whole hoo-ha from the trad bros about structuralist versus post-structuralist. But like I guess what's really fascinating when it comes to for example, like adding bouncing off what you said in terms of Allah, God, there is that kind of approach where you can take a very logical kind of principled approach in order to prove God's existence, right? But then we know this like just merely using like language try to describe God is never going to actually encapsulate everything about God, right? God's always existing out of our sort of five senses and greater than us. So it's like it's not going to be bound by our words and the way we describe, right? And that's why like I guess Imam Ghazali brings in about that whole dhawq and experience that really draws upon that connection to Allah, but can never really be quantified and described in words in the way that we have in language, right? So it's like there's aspects about the reality that cannot be conceived just through our material and through our sort of or words even or aspects and so the question is when it comes to I guess structuralist versus post-structuralist thought is like is I guess is truth only embodied through what we can describe and what's, you know, physical and all that, or is truth much more than that? And I would say like the tradition or
That's
Islam
a
is more,
philosophy of science question.
yeah, Islam leans towards more a post-structuralist in the sense that it's greater. Like Allah is greater than what we, you know, just, you know, conceive of. Like God, even like when it comes to theology, it's like how it's I guess codified within our tradition. It's like trying to make sense of God, but it's not like explaining God like in its essence, right? We can never know the essence of.
That's why that was Imam Ghazali's whole thing, right? The reason what he represents is like the rational method won't actually lead you to God. It'll lead you to a concept of like a distant God, like there's a unitary being, but it won't actually lead you to have that full belief in God. You need the experiential aspect for that.
Yeah.
And that's beyond science. Science only leads you to that initial part. And I think that's where sort of different discussion, but where
that's what the Maturidis say.
The limits of the go rap IRA type arguments, as in like you can't use science to make someone come over. They need that sort of experiential understanding, and like they have to feel it in their soul.
Yeah, because we know Islam is a system that it's not like it's only founded upon rational and logical argumentation, right? You know, I guess axiomatically we know Allah exists, and so henceforth, once you understood the principles of, you know, within Islam and the foundations of Islam, and go about the spiritual practices, because there's always obviously an emphasis of, you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam towards action, towards doing good deeds, doing even like, you know, many instances it's like, you know, make the heart soft, and it's like if someone just reads that and listens to make the heart soft, like what does that even mean? Like it doesn't mean anything.
Exactly.
But we know as Muslims,
that's
experience. We know it's experience, and we know what a softness of the heart means when it comes to, you know, doing good deeds, being charitable, being good to parents, you know, fulfilling your roles, doing your prayers. We know that experience in tahajjud, etc., will make sense all of a sudden. So it's like, you know what I mean? So like there's so much dimensions to within Islam that sometimes gets missed out within the conversation. And tying it back to temperaments, it's like with the temperaments, it's like it gives you the sort of once you learn the science in of itself through, I guess, its proper teaching way. There's so, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I would like to hear your guys' thoughts as well, but like so much of it is experience. You have to like sit with it. You have to experience it, not just in people, but in nature. You have to reflect upon it. Then, you know, if you just learn temperaments as like knowledge in of itself, it's very abstract, I feel, and like it won't really make sense. But once you sort of apply it and use it in your life, experience it, live it, see it, then it's like a thing that you can't unsee really, because, you know, everyone's experienced fire within people, everyone's experienced water. So yeah. What do you think, Raf? You're in a contemplation mode, or you're just really hot at the moment?
No, I was thinking actually about everything you were saying. I mean, I guess
good chat so far.
The first thing I was thinking was obviously everything's abstract until it's applied. But I understand what you mean in so much as it's a realization of sorts. You know, it's an it's a sense that you pick up of someone's energy that you can't really. If it's a really good analogy that you've drawn, I think, between the idea of the sort of metaphysical and the supernatural, if you want to describe it as such. When we speak of the divine and how we speak of the temperament, things that are in the ghaib, like you can't really see them, but you can know them intrinsically. Yeah. And so I mean, without getting too third eye on everyone, like it is something. You're right. It is almost esoteric, isn't it?
Yeah, and tying it back to, I guess, maybe miracles. Sorry, I don't know if it's sort of related. It kind of is, but we see many miracles that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did throughout his mission, where it's like we will never really know how Allah sort of did it in that sense, but we know that, you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam put the means and put the effort in. So, like, for example, we know the famous one of Aisha radhiyallahu anha, who was told to what was it? It's skipping my. It was like I think it was need the actually no, there was one, I think, during one of the battles where it's like one of the Sahabi had like bread, but then only a small amount of quantity, and so Rasul called Rasul sallallahu in to, you know, give the food, but then Rasul sallallahu like, look, I'll prepare it, and he spat into it, kneaded the dough and put it in the thing and came out and fed like armies of people in. But like things like that we'll never know, because like, for example, he'll be warning them, saying like, look, don't look into the pot as you're, you know, giving it in. And even there's a famous one with Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, where essentially what happened was, you know, because he was part of Ahl Sufa, he was always like hungry, thirsty, etc., sacrificing a lot of Islam. And you know, it's really fascinating in terms of the lengths they went, because maybe other like Muhajirin or Ansar were like working hard in the fields, you know, getting the income, but then you have the Ahl Sufa that were kind of struggling and, you know, wanting to learn from Rasulullah because he was, you know, Rasulullah was in the masjid and they can learn from him, etc. And so, you know, they went hungry and, you know, didn't have clothes. So then Abu Hurairah anhu, when he was given, I think, a glass of milk, Rasulullah said, like, you know, bring everyone from Ahl Sufa to like drink it, and started giving it to each person. He was thinking, oh, there's not going to be left for me. Probably a bit sad, and, you know, who wouldn't be in that situation. And then, you know, he was able to feed everyone, like, so more like things like that we'll never know and understand, right? That's another part of reality we just won't conceive and understand. And there's so many instances like that in the Seerah you can draw from. So kind of, yeah, like it's just a reality that's there, but can we ever truly understand? Like, we won't. Like, Allah in that situation has also made universe in a way where it's like, it's not for us to know and for understand. There's only a limit to the human being in terms of understanding, right? So yeah, so it was a bit of a tangent, but
no, I get what you mean. I guess miracles and stuff like that are on like the extreme end of like, we just can't rationalize that at all, and that's beyond like even our comprehension.
Yeah, because it completely goes against what we typically understand about patterns and laws of existence and nature. So it actually defies that, whereas something like the temperament or the idea of the divine doesn't necessarily defy that. Do you know what I mean?
It's simply beyond.
It's beyond, but yeah, like miracles are very difficult.
Yeah.
I think that people I know, if they were to be presented with Islam, like I would go so far as to say that like my Western counterparts who come from a secular tradition like myself would have the biggest difficulty with miracles of anything in Islam.
Yeah.
That's to give like an idea of how much there's this sort of like, you know, how much it defies the typical or the apparent. And that's a big theme in our thought, in contemporary thought, like what is apparent, what is tangible, what can be experimented with and replicated. And yeah, that this is definitive of almost everything philosophically in terms of our trends and our intellectual and philosophical trends. This is definitive. This principle of the apparent, this principle of the quote unquote scientific, you know. Isn't it interesting when we talk about things like tasawwuf, though we refer to it as ilm, like we refer to it as science.
It's a knowledge, yeah. It's a science, yeah.
So we have a different definition. Science is not merely what is tangible, what is physical, but it extends to what is experiential as well for Muslims. Because why we call tasawwuf ilm or like science is because it is replicable. Like you can see the different states a person goes through on their spiritual journey. When you have a tariqah, for example, there are specific sort of stages a person must go through, right? And the Sheikh takes you through the different stations, and this has been done or formulated over hundreds of years. And the reason for the continuation of them is because they work. Hence, it is ilm, like it's not knowledge, rather. It's like a science. It's replicable, right? And it is observable, but it's not necessarily what in the West we would term scientific at all. In fact, it's anti-scientific, right? So in Islam, you have to keep, you have to maintain this. You fight to maintain, rather, not just merely maintain, because it's not easy to do so. You have to maintain this strong understanding, like this grounded understanding, this constant understanding that our world and our imagination extends beyond the apparent and the physical and the literal. And I think that going further on that myself, like you mentioned Dawah and what brings people to Islam, and I have my own experience with that, obviously being a convert. We can look historically at mass waves of conversion, and I know that you guys have a decent understanding as well of mass waves of conversion in your ancestors, like homeland, BD, in Bangladesh and East Bengal. And how did the people come to Islam? Like, it wasn't through someone going around with dot points, was it? It wasn't through somebody going and explaining the
What's bidah and what's not.
Yeah, well, bro, don't start with it. That would have certainly. I wasn't thinking, like, back in the day, if only the sort of extreme Wahhabi movement was around 500 years ago, all the Hindus and the Buddhists could have sent Wahhabis out to the Muslim communities. That would have stopped conversion real fast. Hey, if they were worried about Muslims coming in and converting their people. But yeah, if we understand that it was the Sufis who did so, and everyone understands that. Like, that's a matter of historical fact, that it was the Sufis who drove conversion. The only exception to that maybe being the early Umayyad period, where it was more material. So why are we not replicating that approach to Dawah today? Why have we suddenly become obsessed with the rational? I mean, yeah, you guys can
Or even the
speculate
legal,
as to
right?
that. Yeah, the legal. I mean, that's more broadly in terms of the way we approach our deen.
Yeah.
But like, when it comes to proselytizing, or preaching or teaching non-Muslims about Islam, what is it that's led us to this inclination? Like, I have an answer in my head, but if you guys,
Yeah, it's interesting we talk about Dawah, because I've been recently just taking this turn in conversation towards Dawah and how it happened historically. Rudolph Ware, he's a black American scholar from the States, and it's crazy, like, his insights. Like, I was never put on it before. I just used to listen to the usual just Salafi leaning go rap stuff, but his sort of like explanation on how people converted in the past, it just sort of blew my mind recently. He studies specifically how the Quran was taught in West Africa, in the Senegal, Gambia area, and he talks about how that Sahara Desert, Western Africa area, is one of the only places in the world where Islam was not spread by conquest. It was spread by teachers, and or the inner area anyway, and through the practice of teaching Quran. What's it called? I forgot exactly, but it's the teaching Quran on the tablets, and that's still practiced to this very day.
Is it lahu? What is it?
On the Jahanke method of teaching kids Quran. And he said what the Quran teachers did was their message, their overall purpose was to provide benefit to the son of Adam. So they didn't care who they taught. They were teaching literacy, teaching people how to read, and they brought their Quran teaching along with it. So he's just exemplifying how there are contexts where people weren't preachy. They just provided benefit to people. And it was in that way that people were turned on to the religion, right? And he was talking about how it's crazy, bro. This is something that, like, we should really look into, how the mass conversion of Black American people in the 60s, 70s, and even earlier, it was like a cultural force where it wasn't Dawah door to door. It wasn't like, I don't know, pamphlets door to door and stuff like that. It wasn't even people saying, oh, you should convert. It was, they saw how the Black American Muslims lived and practiced the faith, and just as a living example, they were turned towards it, right? And Black American Muslims did all this stuff that, like, fed kids on Fridays, fed like the members of the community, and it's like it became something like attractive, like, oh, they're Muslim, that's a good thing, and they're just seen as the better people, right? As in their practice, and that's how, like, there was mass conversion of like families and like whole generations of people in Black America. There's something I'm still looking into, but like, you know, Sherman Jackson, he talks about it as well. But it's crazy. It's like us, like Curries, Arabs, like we have like we have to go up to them and tell them about Islam, whereas that wasn't done before. It was just we served people and we provided benefit to them, and then they got to know, like, oh, these are Muslims, this is what they do. That's how they became attracted to Islam. As in, that blew my mind, because I always envisioned Dawah, how I was taught in the MSAs, as like, oh, you'd have to have a Dawah stall, and it's super cringe, and like, I don't want to talk to anyone, but I just have to stand there anyway, looking awkward. And that's what I did anyway, like, because I was like, I just like, if someone approached me about a religion and I was trying to walk to my class, I'd just ignore them. So why would someone listen to me, right? So I was like, the methods that we've been taught and we practice in our university campuses, I reckon maybe there's a space for it, like dialogue with randoms, but it's not the way people are going to become Muslim, right?
Yeah. Bro, I have a lot to say about this, and I actually am glad that the conversation is heading this direction because we can kind of draw upon, I guess, instances of the Seerah in order to dissect it as well.
Yeah. You can bring the whole Seerah element to it. Yeah.
So for example, we know Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was already known as trustworthy,
Exactly.
truthful before, to the point where people would give them their valuables and their assets for him to take care of, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because essentially back then it's not like now we have banks and you put our money in, it's all going to be safe, right? Like when they had lots of wealth and coins and gold, they're not going to leave in the house because everyone's just going to know where the gold is and rob them, right? So they have to like find these like secret locations and bury them. So like one famous example, we know Sahaba Rumi radiyallahu anhu. For example, long story short, like he came from Rome to spoke Latin, but then he was actually Arab in ethnicity, came back, was a slave, but then worked his way to become rich. And then became Muslim. And then he tried to make hijrah, and then however he got stopped in the process because the Meccans were like where do you think you're going and stuff like that. And long story short, he's like, I can kill you all of you basically because you're an expert archer, but like just if you want, just leave me alone and take my wealth, and I'll show you where it's buried. So like we see. I don't know where I was going with that actually. How's that tied in? I was making a point.
You're talking about treasure is hidden? The treasure is hidden?
You're talking about the trustworthiness
of the Prophet.
The fact of the...
Okay, I don't know. Okay, let's sideline that story. It was connecting somehow. So we know like Rasulullah... I was trying to make the point that like, it's a bit of a... I don't know why I went down that tangent, but like money has to be, buried somewhere in a secret location, right? But then people were still trusting Rasulullah with their wealth.
Yep.
Right. So that's like an emphasis on how trusted he was within the community. And we know, for example, when Rasulullah was preaching Islam, obviously publicly, a lot of the Qurayshi leaders were like, astaghfirullah, they were like, we had so much hope in you, but, look, what have you done? Like people already knew, they already envisioned him in such a manner, right? People saw him that he had that potential, like in their eyes, kind of be like a Qurayshi leader, right?
Yep.
Already a leader kind of material because he was so truthful and no one can say anything bad about him. But then it was when Islam came along, that all changed because it's kind of going against the fabrics of the society, right? And things that they stood for. So there's an aspect, for example, because he's already had that reputation of being Rasulullah of being trustful and truthful within his society, people converted, right? But then within that group of people of the Meccan society, there were the rich and powerful that obviously didn't convert because it's like, I don't want to lose my leadership, I don't want to be dominated, etc. Right? And so there's already people like, I think when it comes to Islam, it's so multifaceted that you have to kind of cover all bases to draw different types of people in. So like for example, the rich people they're gonna be a bit they're not going to straight away convert because they have a lot more to lose naturally, right? So we know the early, converts to Islam were obviously like the slave class, right? From there, it was like building the base. But then slowly over time, what happened was, obviously building the base in Medina, bringing all different tribes, making treaties, etc. A famous one, obviously, the Ansar, and getting that political power where basically the Quraysh and Meccans had no option at one point. Like we know Khalid ibn Walid, who was pretty much converted just before the conquest of Mecca, right? But then at the time he was like in part of the Battle of Badr against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But like it got to the point where like obviously he's well established and known in his community. It's like I have no option. Like it got to that point because he had no option. Islam was too powerful. Islam was getting too powerful, and it's like he had to convert. Not only that, but he realized like Rasulullah just seems to know things one step ahead of me, and I'm like such a good warrior. And so it's like there's so many different shades of how Islam can be portrayed. It's like there's already that people convert because they already know of Rasulullah's previous sort of how he conducted himself within society, etc. There's another one where like Abdullah bin Salam, who was a Jewish rabbi and like the prestigious Jewish rabbi, most knowledgeable from the Jews. He just saw Rasulullah's face and was like, this is not a face of Allah, and converted, right? There's other people that were like warned that stay away from Rasulullah because he says magic and he's going to put a spell on you. And then some of them were like went with it, or they actually like questioned, like, look, I'm an intelligent man. If he has something good to say, I'll listen. If I don't like it, I'll reject it and move on. But then, a lot of people converted. People, what's it called? Like, when the khutbah starts, you say, khutbatul haja, I think.
Khutbatul Haja, yeah.
It's like people convert just listening to that, and that's it. Like, he hasn't even started the khutbah, he's saying that, and there's like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard.
That was a poet. I forgot his name.
Yeah. So like, you have so many multifaceted ways and people converting. Like, for example, like the big Qurayshi leaders, when it came to, for example, different battles where the heart wasn't fully part of Islam, but they took the Shahada. It's like when they were given valleys of wealth, they're like, this man cannot be a prophet.
I was wondering.
This man has to be a prophet, because it's like, why else are you like accumulating all this wealth and you're not even taking it for yourself? Like, no normal leader does that, right?
Yeah. All that wealth is yours. He just gave it to them.
And then we know the famous Ansar got a bit sad. It's like, we've done everything and you haven't given us that wealth.
Yeah.
Because essentially it was just a tactical move in terms of drawing the Qurayshi leaders within. So my point's probably not as clear, but basically what I'm saying, there's so many different ways and approaches of bringing people to Islam. With the rich and the poor. And even, I don't think like, okay, so I have this other thought as well. I've been thinking, because like there's been this sort of, which I don't agree, it's kind of, you can see how Rasulullah kind of almost accepted anyone's shahada. It's not like they had to have this purified version of Islam in their heads, because they still had this kind of, paganistic, or sort of not paganistic, more like a tribalistic approach to how they viewed Islam. It's still it's hard to just be
you
like,
see it lingering in the
you see it lingering. You see it in the battles, and you see a lot of munafiqs as well. It's not like Rasulullah didn't know who the munafiqs were, but they're still part of like the laxity of in terms of people coming to Islam.
Even the hadith about how a wicked man, Allah may use a wicked man to do good for the ummah, and how there's not necessarily going to be just righteousness to propel. And we know like there's different theories about what that hadith is, who that hadith rather is referring to.
Yeah.
Best not to say or speculate, but there's certainly that case where it's like it wasn't this sudden. There were definitely Sahaba. Here's the thing, there were definitely Sahaba who were completely transformed in the space of even a moment. We know this happened.
Can I add a quick story to that, just to prove your point? Like, I forgot the Sahabi's name, but the leader of Banu Hanifa, the name skipping my mind, but Allah sort of gifted him, like he got captured and basically was sent to Rasulullah, and Rasulullah, accept Islam, but then he's like, no, and then they put him in the masjid for like 3 or 4 days, and then like nothing happened, he still didn't convert, and then Rasulullah was like, okay, just let him go. He was like a big leader. He was like a rich. He was just like, I'll give you everything you want, anything you need. Yeah. And he was just like, no, like he was just like, accept Islam. He's like, nah. But he was in the masjid for 3 days. So what happened was like he was watching people like, pray, and obviously there was conversations going in about Islam and all that. And then when Rasulullah decided to leave, and then he took his shahada, basically. So like to prove you. And then what happened after the shahada is like, because he used to eat a lot whilst he was being in the masjid, like they'll give him food, like best food, and be eating it all. But as soon as like basically took his shahada, gave it. The Sahaba basically gave him the same amount of food, and he didn't eat that much, even very little. And then the Sahaba were like, he literally was eating so much yesterday, and he's eating so little now. What happened? It's like that's the hadith of the Muslim eats with 1 stomach and the kafir eats with the 7 stomachs. So it basically is that context. So just to add to what you're saying, it's like people like transform like that, like in an instant, because the whole point is to bring Islam, like people within that fold of Islamic environment, culture, and get them to experience it. And then once you showcase that, then a lot of people naturally incline towards I think
that's a really nice addition. Thanks. And I think as well we add on to that the idea about how we do believe as Ahlul Sunnah all of the Sahaba were upright and righteous and genuine. There are some slight definitional debates about what constitutes a Sahaba, as we know, but we believe the Sahaba were upright, and we tend to be more generous in extending that definition than, for example, the Shia, right?
Yeah.
And with that, however, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Sahaba are all of the same rank. And there were differing ranks between them in terms of to what extent they fully shed themselves of Jahiliyyah, and to what extent they fully embraced or entirely embraced the Quranic, the embodiment of like the Quranic character and the prophetic character. So it is not something so simple. But I do fear that a lot of these understandings are lost on the Muslim community today when it comes to outreach and dawah. Don't you? And I think that's the point of this conversation. It's like reflect upon these complexities.
I reckon the big takeaway from there as well, Tanzim Ref as well, the people converted in different ways.
Many different ways.
Some people were like, the prophet is so generous that he cannot but be a prophet. Like he has to be a prophet. He's that generous, and that wasn't preaching at all. That was just literally his generosity, right? So that's through his behavior and how he treated people, right? And other people, there's one Sahaba he wrestled and beat like twice. And then he's like, all right, this guy's Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is not he's not a regular man. He's like, I'm the strongest guy in Medina. And then there's just like such a multitude of ways, right? So it just goes to show that the open preaching in the marketplace is not the only method. And I reckon what'd be really interesting is looking like a historical reading of like, where in the world were Muslims a minority, but over time they became a majority.
Well, I was about
what did those people do? So West Africa is one example, and I'm like, maybe even the Bengal, like because they settled there, the Muslims settled there, and over 300-400 years it became majority Muslim, East Bengal. Right?
Let's go back further than that, man. Let's go to the Umayyad period. So do you guys know about conversion under the Umayyad period? So after there was obviously the second fitna and the assumption of Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan to the throne and to the Khilafah, that established the dynasty of Bani Umayyah after he left the Khilafah to his son Yazid. So we had the Umayyad dynasty, and now the Umayyad dynasty, with the exception of, as everyone knows, the exception of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, were not known for their particular religious or like they weren't known for their observance or their devotion, and many of them were, you know, to put it without, you know, put it quite plainly, they were like fusikun, like they were not good Muslims, they were fasiqs. And with this, with the fasiqeen of the Umayyads, there was a strong determination to not let the population convert, because the state and the economy was based on the jizya which was levied. So the predominant source of income for the treasury was the tax levied against non-Muslims. However, what started to happen was, despite the disparaging of conversion and the discouragement of conversion amongst especially non-Arab peoples, they started to convert en masse. Now, some of them did definitely convert to avoid the jizya. So I'm talking mostly about Persians and Berbers now, because when the Umayyad state spread out, these were the two more prominent factions. When they began to accept Islam, it started to pose a problem for the Umayyad authority, because they were losing their source of revenue. So you know what they did? They basically said, well, we'll levy the jizya against you anyway. And it came to the point where they actually banned conversion to Islam, which is something unimaginable, right, for us. It's like, the whole point is to convey the message and spread the message. These guys who were khulafa of the ummah, they took the title of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I believe, right? The head of the political supreme figure in Islam. And they were discouraging people from converting to Islam, and they wanted to keep it as a sort of Arab club, so to speak. And so what happened was, all of these, there was a movement called the Shu'biyah movement, which was non-Arab Muslims, also called Mawali. So Persians and Berbers, but predominantly Persians, start with them. In Khorasan, they began to campaign and rebel against the authority as Muslims. And that was when you had the sort of momentum for the Abbasid revolution, which was built on the back of converts to Islam, overthrowing the Umayyad authority, or helping to overthrow the Umayyad authority, because there was a lack of, how would you say, legitimacy to the way that they were going about their attitude to conversions and their attitude to Islam in general, more broadly. But going on from that, when they were reading text, I was reading translation of texts written by Persian converts as part of this broader Shu'biyah movement. And a lot of it, there were also some from where my family come from, Calabrian and Sicilian converts to Islam who contributed to this. And it was very much like Islam is a universal religion. But what they would say, the Persians would say, is the same God who honored the Arabs and took them from these disparate desert tribes on the corner of the earth to being this great authority and power that looms over us now, that same God, will they not honor us as we are being downtrodden, as we are being neglected? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that was the attitude of a lot of the Persian lower classes, was like, well, the Arabs were irrelevant and they lived, very simple lives and very difficult lives on the Arabian Peninsula for the most part. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them and made them a global empire, the most powerful global empire with almost infinite wealth and power. And thus they rationalized to themselves, it's like, well, that same God will surely favor us because God is on the side of the oppressed, not on the oppressor. And you can see the psychology. So it wasn't merely the fact that they wanted to avoid jizya, because some people say, oh, the Persians converted to Islam to avoid jizya, but that's not true, because, as I mentioned, the Umayyads still took jizya from new converts anyway, and they didn't let you convert. There's actually a story where hundreds of people came to the Umayyad governor to give their conversion to Islam, and he rejected it.
Wow.
They came like all the way across to Kufa or Damascus or something, and he just said, no, like, you can't convert, I need your money. And to humiliate them even further, do you know who took the jizya from the lower classes in Persia? This is the craziest thing. The Dehqans. So the Dehqans were the old Zoroastrian landowners, old Zoroastrian aristocracy. So the Umayyads left the Kafir aristocracy in place to levy taxes. So at one point, these kuffar Persian landowners were levying the jizya against Muslim Persians, poorer Muslim Persians. So this is how cooked it was back then, right? And then on top of that, what happens is, well, basically, as a consequence of that, what happens is these people start, these Muslims, these new converts to Islam, start this movement. And the entire momentum for the movement was that regardless of what the political structure and authority is, this is about us and Allah and truth. And what the Prophet ﷺ taught. That's what this is about. That's what we care about. We don't care about anything else. And that is something incredibly profound, because it shows us like a mass conversion to Islam merely because it was the refuge for the oppressed, even when those oppressors were Muslims.
Yeah.
And we look
That's
at that
crazy,
now,
yeah,
and we
crazy.
draw comparisons with like the conversion of African Americans and conversions in West Africa, which had a little bit, I think, to do, the great jihads of West Africa had a lot to do with European aggression. And then we look at now the Latino conversions to Islam, which are quite like significant in number, going from an almost tiny minority of converts to a huge community now in the US, especially in parts of the South. So I think that if anyone is in Dawah and anyone's listening, like, to think about all of these things very deeply before you go out, or before you invest your time and effort in trying to teach Islam to people, and think about what it was that drew people there in the first place.
I think it's fascinating with just your point about Islam stands for the oppressed and not the oppressor, because that reminds me, interestingly enough, when, for example, when Abu Sufyan came to the courts of Heraclius, and Heraclius was pretty much quizzing him in terms of, who is this Prophet Sallallahu and his characteristics. And one of the questions he asked was, are poor people converting to Islam, or are the rich and the elite converting to Islam in Mecca? And it was just like the poor and the poor people are converting. And then he made a comment. Heraclius was like, "Look, that this is the religion of truth, because for the rich people there's so much to lose, so they're not going to convert. It's always going to be the poor people that don't have much that will convert to like this true religion, because you don't want the religion to be for just the elites. Like, that's essentially for them. It becomes a way to
Control the
masses. Yeah. I think Nietzsche made a similar kind of observation.
That's right, like the very common thing, very common sort of jingoism, part of the jingoism of the West when it comes to religion, isn't it? Like, religion is just a structure by which it's used to control and oppress.
Yeah.
Just to go back to your point, Raf, about the Abbasids using the Persian people, the oppressed Persian people who became Muslim. So I guess what you could say is they appropriated and made culturally relevant Islam in a way that empowered them. I guess
Actually,
that's sort of how
it wasn't so this is the thing about the
That was the
Abbasid
Persians.
revolution. This is the thing about the Abbasid revolution. Okay, basically what happened was there was a revolution brewing, and it was led by Banu Hashim. So that's what the movement was initially called, the Hashimiyya, and this was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's family and descendants. And there were several. We know of several Shi'i rebellions against Umayyad authority, including like rebellions by Abdullah bin Zubair, Nafs al-Zakiyya, and there were a whole series of these Shi'i rebellions against the Umayyad authority. But then there was also a movement, and it was a secret underground movement led by Muhammad. His name was he went by Abu Hashim, but I think his real name was Bukhair. And so what happened was they had a slogan, which was basically like Quran, Sunnah, and a leader from the prophetic family. So that was the slogan, but they didn't have a particular person in mind. They didn't have like the Abbasid, the future Abbasid princes in mind. They were basically looking for a quote unquote a suitable candidate to thrust upon as a figurehead for their revolution, to respond to the Umayyads. So it was a kind of a very hastily scrapped together. Who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? It's like we need to find a figurehead. We need to find a candidate. And it was really disappointing, I guess, when As-Safa, is it As-Safa or As-Safa? Someone who speaks Arabic can help me. The first caliph of the Abbasids came to the throne and massacred a lot of the Persians who helped him get it, and reestablished a lot of the hegemony. Although he did give patronage to Persians, and it did change after that. But there was like, to some extent, like a continuation of the oppressive policies of the Umayyads, although toned down a bit. But my point is, like, this revolution was not something that the Abbasids sort of used Islam or manipulated Islam or preached Islam in such a way as to frame it to Persian converts such that they would get support. Rather, it was these converts and their ilk who started the revolution, led the revolution, and the leader, one of the leaders was Abu Muslim, who merely went by Abu Muslim, and that's like not the name is, it's almost funny. It's like when you see someone come to Australia and their name is like Archangel or Brutsesi, for example, or I don't know, Muhammad Abdullah, and they come to Australia and they change their name to John Smith. So Abu Muslim was a Persian who had a Persian name, and then upon like accepting Islam or becoming the leader of a general in the revolution, took the name Abu Muslim. And whenever he was asked about his real name, he would be like, "Why are you asking me that? All that matters is my religion. All that matters is my devotion to Islam." So yeah, he literally, it's like the John Smith of Muslim names. And he took this name. And he was probably one of the most powerful men, if not the most powerful and important man in the Abbasid revolution. And he was a Persian. And he led other Persians in this revolution. And the spirit with which they overthrew the Umayyads was so genuine and so zealous that the Umayyad army in all their might couldn't counter it at all. Like they couldn't even lift a finger to stop them. And that's it. That was an incredibly significant chapter in Islamic history, because it changed the trajectory forever. It ensured that Islam was never to be a religion or a system or a deen that was merely in the hands of a handful. It was to be a universal deen. It was to be for all of humanity. And that was protected, and that was won on the backs of the martyrs in the Abbasid army and their ilk. So yeah, it was very much a bottom-up grassroots movement, sort of not a top-down. And this was, a lot of them were like sort of, as Tanzim alluded to before, they weren't all thoroughly Islamized. A lot of them were very sort of hazily incorporated into the Muslim polity.
Because like there's a story, right? It kind of strikes me. I forgot the name of the leader, because there's a story of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, when there was like this big, rich leader converted to Islam, and then I think they were both together when they were journeying out to somewhere, and it was really hot, and Muawiyah, I didn't think he had shoes, and and he was walking, and I think the person, that leader, was like on a horse, like or a camel, whatever. And Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was like, can you lend me shoes, because it's so hard. And he's like, it doesn't befit a man to like yourself, for me to give you shoes. And and then he said, "Oh, can I at least borrow your, camel or something? Because like, I'm getting tired and I don't have much and etc." He's like, it doesn't, it's basically alluding that you're low class. He's Muslim as well, right? Converted. But it was like really rich and esteemed.
He's saying that to Muawiyah as
Yeah.
well.
So this,
radiallahu
okay,
anhu.
I wanna say, so this is a funny. So this story basically, years later when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was leader, right? The caliph basically. That guy, he was like I think he was a governor, but he wasn't obviously in the position of Muawiyah anhu. And so when he comes in, he wasn't even governor. It was a bit of a lower position. So he comes into Muawiyah's office, just like comes in, and then Muawiyah anhu was like, do you remember that time when I was a young boy? Because he was only like, I think like pretty young when that happened. And he was just like, remember that time when you looked at me so low in that situation? Subhanallah, how like Allah sort of turns the situation, like subhanallah. But basically my point, just adding to what you were saying, is like that kind of reaction and that attitude isn't really what you'd call like someone that's embodying Islamic kind of values in that sense, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, however, it's like he was still within the Islamic fold. He wasn't getting like, obviously I'm not saying like you should let racism in and all that, because there's also an instance where Bilal radiallahu anhu was insulted because that's like, oh, he's the son of a black woman, and then that was seen as a slur and also
You still have the
so you
traits
have
of
those
Jahiliyyah is what the Prophet
but yeah, that's
said.
what I'm trying to explain that
Yeah.
is like it did exist, and you also saw attitudes like that amongst like the rich leaders. That so it's really fascinating, I guess. Sometimes we have that kind of attitude. It's like we have to have this perfect shahada and they have to be rid of every Jahiliyyah sort of thinking, but like it didn't happen in the Seerah, because as I said, like give them time, like put them within the fold of the Muslim community and give them time to grow and understand what Islam's about and really embody it, and that'll take like years of probably spiritual training and all that. But you can say like in the current context, like does that such a community exist? Because we see so many so much divisiveness, and I guess it's a big conversation to
What
have.
would your answer be to someone who's come into the fold of Islam and they're like, bro, I just can't deal with this community, man. Like, I don't know what's going on. They just seem to hate each other more than they hate their enemies.
I mean, like,
and
did you go to a Salafi mosque?
Nah, man, not even, bro. Let's talk about this. Let's
Sorry, before we switch up the topic, I'll come back to it, right?
yeah.
So you were saying the Abbasid Revolution was powered by the grassroots Persian
A lot of
masses
it, yeah.
that were converting, right? And they made Islam their own and made it into a sort of indigenous force for themselves, like a revolutionary power. So what we're talking about, going back to Black Americans and the mass conversion in West Africa, because the scholars were providing the people with benefit, teaching them how to read, stuff like that, right? And if we examine history, the small glimpses that I've seen, right, with like Abdul Hakim Murad talks about how in the Nusantara, the Southeast Asia, so like Indonesia, Malaysia, a big part of how they converted was that the Sufi Islamic scholars, they incorporated certain cultural practices, as in they presented Islam through like, I think it was like puppet shows. So the idea of harnessing the cultural force of a people and using that to present to them. So I think in Bengal something similar may have happened, because I know it was like 1700s that these Sufi peers that sort of established sort of lodges across the villages, because it was sort of like a deforestation process, and that land was being settled for the first time. And it was in those 200-300 years that it entirely converted to Islam, like 90% plus, right? So and they were sort of drawing on the existing sort of language of the Hindu culture, of the Upanishads, and that I guess Bengali you could say is a confluence of the Hinduism and the Buddhism and the Islam. So using all of that to present the idea of God to the masses, and that's why I guess that's what related to the people, and they converted to Islam. But at the same time,
can I get, because I want to add something to just, you said the Chinese China, right? Because I was actually reading like a whole article, and I'll put it as my status on Facebook, in terms of like even how the Chinese viewed, like, because some of the Sahaba came to China to give Dawah and stuff, even some of the Sahaba. And so even the way that the Chinese wrote about the Sahaba that came was through like that kind of that Chinese philosophical kind of lingo in terms of to describe. So it's almost like obviously there's aspects that might not fully gel with or mesh with like Islam in its kind of theological aspect, but it's almost like that allowance to see it through their own kind of scriptures and say, or if, for example, it's like perhaps like Islam just a continuation of what we have, and so it's like you see that gelling. And so even like it was really fascinating reading that because it was through like a Chinese account of the Sahaba that came to give dawah. So like you see that kind of I don't know what to call, like fluidity or that kind of perception of Islam as well, in the sense that they saw it as also almost closer to their sort of beliefs anyway. So and it's not like the Sahaba that came along kind of condemned it. It's like it gave them that sort of, I guess, allowance to see it. So sorry, I just wanted to add.
Yeah, and Bengal itself, like as I was saying, was like on the peripheries of the sort of Brahmanical superstructure, academics call it. So they weren't incorporated into the Hindu structure. They were sort of the lower classes, and they were sort of the poorer regions as well. That's why they found Islam to be empowering in that sense, because it aligned with like breaking free from the caste system. Exactly. So that's the particular cultural referent that they had, and that's what appealed to them, of breaking away and making Islam their own. And I guess, so where I was going with this is that for like we started this conversation about dawah, right? And about how pamphleteering and going door knocking is a completely foreign concept in these Western countries, right? So just as these scholars and people of the past did, they made Islam their own, like an indigenous force. So how do we make Islam relatable in this Western context? Not relatable, that just sounds very cliche, but how do we make it a cultural force and a power where people actually don't see it as like cringe, don't see it as like very foreign thing. So this leads back to what you were saying, how it's just very divisive and really harsh, like our methods really of dawah, crucial, right? Man. So we have to, and this goes back to what you're always saying about Dr. Samir with Auburn Mosque, the Kemba Mosque, about how they're just foreign impositions on Sydney, because it's not what we are, it's just what we're bringing it from Lebanon, and that doesn't represent the understanding of Islam according to Sydney, Australia. If we did, that would reflect maybe indigenous elements in masjids and stuff like that, right? If we were truly to take account of the culture here, insofar as there is this Australian culture, I don't think it exists besides indigenous culture, right? I guess, and then you sort of like sort of Western Sydney cultural sphere that we have here as well, like past the M5 corridor from Kingsgrove onwards. It's
the
like
Red Rooster line.
There's a Red Rooster line that goes the other way. So sort of like there's a cultural sphere here. How do we make Islam relatable to it? Like people don't have to think to be religious, you have to start dressing that way. That's like one of the first impositions. It's like you're restricted by, and that's, I think, that's a delineator for a lot of, even where we're from, Pakistan, Bangladesh, this and that. It's like, to be religious, you have to dress a certain way. And that's like, even though that's such a basic barrier, it's like, I have to change my lifestyle completely, but you don't though. Yeah. So it's like, it's as much an identity politics thing.
Yeah, you can wear your Gucci flip-flops.
Exactly. You can wear anything.
For anyone who's listening, we're not talking about like the fara'id, like the what is wajib to cover in terms of the aura. We're talking about like Muslim cosplayers, someone I know.
Exactly, cosplay. So people think the cosplay is also obligatory, but it's not. You can be yourself and still be 100% authentically Muslim. I think that's what we have to develop in Australia if we're going to give dawah here. How do we make it relatable to our culture and also incorporate what's indigenous to here? In a way, I guess, we don't even know anything about like native indigenous people at all. We just sort of ignore it, like that's past genocides, whatever, right?
And the amount, like, I guess Islam can be portrayed through
exactly, exactly. How do we make it relevant? I think in America they have the black cultural force. They're more American than that. That's what carries like everything cool is black, everything relevant is black, and it's from their cultural power that Islam has a place, right? Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, like why them and not like a Pakistani doctor?
Yeah, and we don't want to be like the colonizer / like why people kind of hijacked aspects of culture, like jazz and stuff that is stolen.
Yasir Qadhi said like you give 100,000 Pakistani doctors, they haven't made the impact. Like high society, they're like doing really well in America. They haven't made the impact that Muhammad Ali, this one person, did for Islam. So that goes to show like this cultural power that certain figures had and what it did for Islam. Like we're not going to do it just living our, I don't know, corporate lives. We have to connect with the culture in some way, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think what you wanted to get to, right?
This is like, it's really hot in here. For people who speak temperament, you gotta understand it's really hot in here, and I'm very passionate about this. So let's see where we end up now. Let's see where we end up. Okay. First of all, I really feel so like this engulfs me. I can't explain.
This is Raf's whole being. Like we're glad we got here.
The first point I have to make relates to what you just said. So it's not a specific point. It's not an addition.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize something. How much more hyped is everyone when a middle class white man comes in to take his shahada than when someone from sort of an ethnic background, maybe lower class? How much more hype and traction is there around the former than the latter? Tell me. What do you reckon?
Like fully hyped. It's like, oh,
bro, it's completely different, right?
Yeah.
But here's the point I made before about the Abbasid revolution. The Dehqans, who were the landowners in Persia, were allowed to keep the Zoroastrian religion. And they continued to be
they were
pagan.
the oppressive class.
Yeah. So they continued to be Zoroastrians a lot longer than the lower classes did. Right?
Because they had that clout. They had that
why did they need to
position in
convert?
society.
There was no... you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yet we're here all the time being so hyped and so intent on converting the sort of archetypal Shahada Manush to Islam, right? Wouldn't you say? Like it seems to be this intense. When we talk about giving dawah, are we focusing on communities perhaps that would really evidently see the utility and the social benefit, first of all, of Islam, or the material benefit or the spiritual benefit of Islam straight away?
You were talking to me about the Latino community in the past in terms of a lot of converts, especially because of their specific situation or context.
Yeah, I guess to make it relevant to Sydney where we are, like we would have to be servicing those who get no service, those who are dispossessed, downtrodden, right? So I guess in Western Sydney there's certain communities, I don't know off the top of my head, not Muslim, I guess maybe indigenous communities, obviously, as in we should have been doing that from the get-go, right?
Communities affected by drug and
alcoholism, it doesn't matter if they're...
Malcolm X talks about this extensively, like how the African-American community had these vices and that Islam gave a resolution to these or provided a resolution or a way out of this kind of poverty. And obviously Malcolm X's main effort was focused on the oppression that his people suffered as a result of external influence. But then he also talked about the need for a rallying or a need for a revolution or responsibility,
and that's
an
why
adaptation of the spiritual cleansing and the importance of the soul and the mind, and a strong mind and a nourished soul. And Islam provided that.
So even on that point, so like this is why this comes into like I guess what happened now, because I guess Muslims, when they, for example, from the Bangladeshi community or from subcontinents, they come here, they want to be middle class, and then they look at these, I guess people like, oh, like I've heard it so many times, like, oh, indigenous people, like Aboriginals are just, they just drink, stay away from them. Or it's like, astaghfirullah, drinking is haram, like stating the obvious kind of stuff. Yeah. But even in the American context, when Nation of Islam was growing and building, and essentially what happened is that they were obviously for the downtrodden, and people were able to rally up, and the Nation of Islam grew to the point where it was like a force, right? And so within that context, it's important to kind of analyze, for example, that we have to show Islam in a way where it's, for the oppressed in that sense. For us, like living in the context of Sydney, it's like very kind of middle class mindset, like how we want to go about life, and we don't even consider the fact, like even us, like I guess born nominally Muslim, they're just like, they look at these alcoholics or see these people that are on drugs, like they just look at them and shun them. But that shouldn't be an attitude, and that's not even the attitude of, for example, many awliya that kind of, there were people that were in prostitution, and it's not like they're just like, look at them, they're so bad. They actually try to take initiative in order to stop them. For example, pay them like $300-$400 so that they don't do that prostitution. Like they're all taking actual steps in terms of being part of that society and trying to help people to get out of that. So like we have a kind of different approach where I see many traditionalists just like shun people like that, and it's just like, that's haram, stay away from them, that's it, and the conversation ends there. But it's a lot more deeper than just seeing things like
so
that.
just to build on that, so with Nation of Islam, there was that sort of mass conversion, communal conversion, because of the benefit they were providing on a grassroots level. Like they had like drug rehabilitation programs. They were feeding people, like getting them dressing a certain way so they get out of their condition,
Business
right?
economy.
Exactly. And
Black
that's why they
community.
had such currency. And then the Black Panther Party, you know, that
Yeah.
which was came after, sort of like after MLK died, Malcolm X died, they had that cultural force as well, because they fed school kids who were going to school hungry. They had like morning breakfast for them. So that's why they had that like revolutionary and liberation sort of power, and people really identified and supported their movement. As it quickly fizzled out because FBI, CIA, stuff like that. But in terms of making an actual difference, you see where it begins, right? It's not at a Dawah stall. It's providing benefit to the downtrodden, right? And that's why I respect something like Brothers in Need
yeah,
in
the
Sydney.
boys who go
Like
down.
instead of like
feed
just
people.
talking all the time, like, you know, like, oh, how are we gonna? There's not even left
Can you
wing
give a
take.
context of what Brothers in Need feel overseas?
Yeah, Brothers in Need. They just
Give me a free plug.
literally a group of brothers that just go out and feed homeless people in the CBD, central business district in the middle of the city, where there's a lot of homeless people like under makeshift housing and bridges and stuff, and they just straight out go feed them. Nothing required.
And people,
No
like,
obligation,
it's not like they full go in Dawah mode and
yeah,
you know,
no, it's just
like,
giving food.
Give them food. Like, do you know about Islam, brother? And then give them the food. It's just like it's like the kind
Transaction,
of
yeah.
underhand secret like thing that you pull out.
Yeah.
But like what happened is like even just doing that, a lot of people converted. I've
Really,
heard stories-
I don't even know the detail of it.
Yeah, I've heard like, you know, in just doing that, eventually people just get intrigued. Like, you know, obviously, you know, they're a bit, you know, Muslim-y looking, and you know, they probably pray out there, so they're being like, I guess, very expressive, but not expressive to the point where they're shoving Islam down their throat in Dawah, Kabibian mode, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, but there's been conversions like this.
Just to add, like when we're talking about the oppressed now, we're talking from a pure practical and social liberation perspective. It's not even like a left wing, like, oh, the oppressed, let's theorize about them. What do they need? What are the structures of power? We're talking about actual grassroots, what has worked to sort of provide benefit and change society. And that's what turns people onto, that's where you gain that cultural currency and cultural power to be like, wow, no, Islam is something cool, something like actually relevant to me, right? So that just goes to show it's not even a left right wing thing. It's sort of like what works in terms of
because
social.
even with Islam is cool thing, like just there's, I think, like subhanAllah, like the Seerah, so many examples. Like the very simple one that we all know is that, you know, obviously poetry is utmost importance in Arab society, and that's the way to really make your mark. And it was, you know, there's a lot of honor and prestige of being, you know, a good poet. It's completely different to now. Like it's almost being shunned, or any sort of, you know, arts movement is like, you know, we're very capitalistic in that sense. But like, anyways, in that specific society, is obviously, you know, poetry and art was very cherished, and it was almost like a way of doing media.
Exactly,
right?
that was the social
but then
currency.
but that's why the Quran in that context was so powerful.
Yeah, it
because
was-
like
it broke-
not only it's like, obviously the standard of it cannot be matched, right?
Exactly,
and people, the best poets recognize that. Even Walid ibn Mughira, who was like, he didn't convert, but like he knew himself, like this is like beyond my scope, right? And he was like one of the most prestigious poets.
That's how they flexed on each other. Different
Yeah.
tribes came together, like your poet versus my poet. Like
Yeah,
head to head.
your poet versus
and
my
then
poet.
that would lead to wars and stuff, right? Like it mattered. So when the Quran came, it like broke the matrix.
And
It
not,
was
So it's like a
and
rap
it's-
battle, bro.
And it's like,
It's so good,
you know
eh?
what's really fascinating? It's like when it comes to, for example, like putting, you know, the Quran and Sunnah, like I just wanted to focus on the idea of mastering an art, right? You'll see people, right? People, like it could be any field, any science, any art field or whatever. Like there's that kind of already inbuilt field. Like there's these processes of, you know, to be good, you have to, I don't know, in music, right? You have to learn, you know, these, you know, musical symbols and play the piano like this and do that, and you become good. And there's like kind of progression in terms of people can tell how good you are because there's a sort of sequence to it, right? And you got to practice whatever, right? And become the height of that, right? But then what happened is like a lot of people that revolutionized that field would not only just master it from that side of things, but also like almost change the fabrics of how music is done to the point where they create their own thing, right? And it's like that's true mastery in the sense they break that kind of the normal sequence of doing things and just shape in a way where it's like transformative, right? We see it's not just in music, like in different fields. That's how it's like, I guess, masters of the art are kind of seen in that manner, right? So then bringing it back to like the Quran and in its context of revelation, it's right. It's like obviously it was the height of eloquence, but then we see even words that the Arabs never heard of. It's like, what's this? I don't understand this. There's aspects like even words like alif lam mim, you know, like those kind of words. Like what does it mean? What's it saying? Like you have so many instances in the Quran where it's like it's breaking those kind of normative laws that you know, sort of the structures of how poets or the masters of poets did it in that time, right? So that kind of emphasizes the you know, the powerful and the mastery that the Quran sort of came with, and you know, and showcased to its society. Not only was it just obviously a height of eloquence, and no poet can kind of you know, attain that kind of eloquence, but it was just redefined, reshaped the whole structure of how they went about, you know, doing things. So like just to take that example to what we were talking about, it's like we haven't really engaged with, I guess, the culture or the norms. There's obviously like, I guess in our context, I can think of like, you know, rap, how it's like a, you know, rap culture really exists, and that sort of way of, you know, mode of doing things, and people really respect a good rapper, what it means to be, you know, rap music, etc. But then us Muslims really engage in, because there is, it's a monoculture, it's a subculture, right? And so it's like mastery of that, showcasing Islam through that, things like that. I'm just giving like
that's a like particularly powerful example for people in America, because that's their cultural force, like the most popular genre of music like in history, right? So just convey a conversation from, I was listening to a podcast by Baraka Blue and Bilal Ware. So Baraka Blue is like this white dude in America. Like he went to study in Azhar with 30 other Americans, just like top level. They're going to become like muftis and stuff, right? And they're just talking like, how did you come to Islam? They're like, all of them unanimously was like, yeah, it's through hip hop that I first learned about Islam. Then I started investigating further. It was like, that was a cultural thing that was cool and had currency and value that first pointed them towards Islam, and then they started investigating, right? So it's like, what sort of vehicles do we have here of that caliber? I guess rap in Australia,
Sport,
it's a thing.
Usman Khwaja,
Sport,
bro.
yeah. Sport, I
He's
think
done a lot, man.
definitely in Australia, like sports stars are worshipped.
Sonny Bill
Williams, yes, 100%.
And Usman Khwaja at the moment. I've
Usman
been
Khwaja
watching
at the
obviously the Ashes series, and watching him interviewed and stuff. He references Islam quite unabashedly.
He does,
and
yeah.
It's
I think
really
sport
like quite
is
amazing, right?
One area, yeah.
And I think he's a positive role model, an example.
Bro, we should become sports stars for that reason, to carry Islam through it. Like, to be honest, like, may as well. Like, what are you going to do otherwise? Just standard career, right? May as well. One of the guys go hard just to represent the deen.
Bro, that's the only thing I can really think of in Australia. Like, our hip hop scene isn't really huge.
Yeah. It's
the only thing I can think of is sport. So someone who does the nation proud in the only thing we care about, because you can't, being a political activist in Australia, everyone will hate you.
True. How do you get people to care about you?
Bro, if you're an Aussie rapper, people hate you even more.
True. Like it's seen as sort of cringe as well.
Yeah, that's it.
Doesn't have that
this
power.
This is the country of the
culture.
cringe, bro. Like, this is the country of that like subversive.
It's like wannabe,
irony.
yeah. This doesn't have that.
We have, my mom was explaining it to me. Like, in Australia, we have
what's this?
This phenomena of cutting the tall trees. Anyone who believes themselves to be something. So my mom was telling it in reference to a story where there was this one teacher, I think, at a school who was a PhD, and whenever like the students would be like, sir, he would be like, you have to refer to me as doctor. And my mom was like, oh man, after he said that was it. Like, he was khalas, man. Like, the Australian ethos, that is like the antithesis of it. Like, it's like, who are you, man? Like, that very deep larrikin
like taking the piss.
Exactly. That's it. That is our attitude, and that's the way, bro. Think about how it's not even apathy about religion. Yeah, it's like religion is something to be mocked and derided. Like anything, bro. Not even religion. Anything that is taken seriously should be laughed at.
Yeah, exactly.
Because why do you take yourself seriously?
Total lack of.
And do you know what's actually heaps deep? Like Ibn Hazm, heaps deep. Here I go. I've switched registers. Ibn Hazm, yeah, legit. He goes, I genuinely think, he didn't say this. He didn't be like, I genuinely think, guys. Yeah. He stopped speaking Spanish or Arabic for a second to be like, guys. I genuinely think. But translated loosely, he's like, people who only speak seriously, I can't stand it. It's one of his pet peeves.
Really?
Yeah. And you know why? Because he said it is the most arrogant thing ever. If you want to be humble, you don't speak seriously. So there is actually like a humility to it. It's like trying to keep everyone humble. Stay in your place. Who do you think you are, bro? Who do you think you are?
So in Australia, messaging would most directly come across if you're using the like the everyman's language, right? Just like an Aussie bogan act, like a straight, like you're like a bloke and you speak like that. That's how people are going to receive your message, right? They're going to receive, not going to receive in some intellectual high language sort of thing, right?
Because that's pretentious.
I'll take another angle. I feel that sometimes, like, if you speak in a very smart way, people are like, oh, this guy sounds smart, and they actually listen to you more. So I think
that's only uni goers and stuff, bro.
Yeah,
like,
bro. It sounds like
I think wider Aussie
UNSW.
culture, they're like, this guy think he's so smart, right?
What was the story you told me about the engineers when they go to the work site?
Oh yeah.
Hilarious.
So my friend who's an engineer, like he's looking over 60 laborers. He has to coordinate them, make sure they're doing things properly. And like they give him total utmost disrespect. It's like, oh, you went to uni, huh? Like,
really?
And there's a problem on site. They just all start smoking. They're like, what do you think, Mr. University? Like, as in
Mr. University.
They're like, it's like looked down upon to be educated by the average Australian. That's the average Australian, right? You're like a tradie, this and that, and you're just working on site. It's like they mock you for having your education.
Legit,
It's weird. It's weird. Like I don't know if it's like that in other countries, but definitely here it's like.
Well, I mean, bro, you got to remember, like, this is a country. 25% of people in this country are descended from convicts. That's still very much resonates.
25% only now, as in
25% of Australians have convict descent.
Convict descent. Okay, right. So that's a big part of the.
And I think that formed, like, because we were the backwater, colonial backwater for a while in a way. Like
so it's a totally so recognizing these cultural elements, I think, is very important to like a Dawah strategy or something, right?
Yeah.
Not that sounds like sort of university level enough as it is. Like, oh, we're gonna have a strategy for targeting the masses, right? But it's like just to think about and conceptualize, like, how do we relate to the common man? I think there's a very important.
And bro, I've spoken to a lot of people about Islam through cricket and things like that. I interacted with non-Muslim. Obviously, I spend most of my life around non-Muslims because of my family and my context there. And one thing that I definitely picked up on, especially with some of my closer friends who are non-Muslims, right? I can tell when someone has sincerity, and I can tell actually when I believe someone would convert. And I actually believe there are probably a dozen guys, Aussie guys, like proper Aussie, like white Aussie guys who would convert to Islam. When they ask me questions, or when they talk about the religion or the ideas of theology or philosophy, they express admiration or even inclination towards Islam. And I think that's something really crucial to bear in mind, because what's the thing that stops them from ever taking that plunge though? It's relevance.
Relevance.
They're like, bro, the philosophy or the actual theology and beliefs and teachings of Islam are actually legit. Like, I can't find fault with them. The idea is one God, there's no son of God or anything like that, any of that nonsense. And I don't have to, things like, oh, well, I can see that alcohol is destructive and corrosive. Like, there's a lot of things within Islam that speak for themselves, and the relevance and the insight of the author of the Quran is clear to them, just from the rulings and from the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I see that, but the problem that they would always have, and the impediment they always have, is that Islam is something very foreign to them. It's like, it would be like going and joining for what we would imagine like becoming a Hindu.
Yeah, literally for them.
And changing your garb and adopting a new name.
So foreign. It's like out of this world foreign.
So that's how they see Islam. Just how you would see that.
Whereas the Black American context, like every black person has like a second cousin or an uncle who's Muslim. So it's in their field of relevance. They're like, oh, I've got a support network. There's brothers I know who live on the other side of town that I could talk to and they'll help me. So, but a white bogan Aussie, it's like, who is he going to go to? He doesn't probably us like migrant Muslim community wouldn't support him like that. We'd just be like there for the show, like, oh, he converted, but I guess having that relevance as well.
The way we would do it and the way we would engage with him would also be off-putting to them.
Yeah, exactly. They'd be like, oh,
they
over the
still
top, brother.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They still have the apathy as well. They're still the same. Like, I grew up very much, like, obviously I have very strong Wog cultural influences through my family, but I grew up very much imbibed with that spirit of apathy, and I hated religion growing up. I used to, there was nothing as a child I hated more than, because my parents wanted me to go to Catholic school, so they sent me to Sunday school so I could get communion done. So I had to go to. There was honestly nothing that I hated more and dreaded more than going to Sunday school. I thought it was the lamest shit in the world. I hated it so much. Every single moment I was there, I was like, this is disgusting. I hate it.
Yeah.
And when I found out that like the priest genuinely was like when I found out he'd been like stood down for doing dodgy stuff, I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised. Like that's how it felt when I was there. Like it just felt like a really horrible place, and it was boring. And I had to get up on my knees, like get on my knees in church. I had to like do all these different things and rituals that I didn't understand. And I think that when things started to change for me was when I realized that my belief, my spirituality, and my acceptance of Islam does not necessarily have to prompt or result in or accompany a change in garb and a change in personality. We have to curb the things within ourselves that are prohibited by deen. So for example, I accepted Islam, I stopped drinking alcohol. I accepted Islam, I changed the way I approached things like interactions with opposite gender. I changed the meat that I ate. But besides that, nothing really changed. And another problem that we have when we do get people to join Islam, most of them leave again, bro. There are most of the research done shows numbers between 2/3 and 75% of converts. They don't stay in Islam. Why? Well, if you ask them about it, and I have asked them about it, ex-converts and people who no longer really associate with Islam who once did, a lot of them cite issues with relevance and a lack of belonging. And they retreat or resort to what is familiar and comfortable to them. But what they need to understand is that what is familiar / comfortable to you doesn't have to be at odds with Islam. But they don't see it any other way because there's no alternative, bro.
The thing is, the Salafi Dawah type, they re-entrench it. They're like, Islam is something strange. You're meant to feel like this, bro. You're meant to feel like an outcast. Like you have no support. As in, they try to valorize it. They're trying to be like, no, this is totally normal. Yeah, you have to feel a bit like sort of like.
Well, you know what I'd say to them, bro?
Yeah.
I'm like, if I wanted to self-flagellate, I'd go be a Shia. Because that's what you're doing. You're basically saying, no, the struggle is how I connect myself.
Exactly, yeah.
There are hadith about Islam began as something strange. But there's also hadith about the deen is easy. There's hadith of the Prophet ﷺ giving dispensations to people who found difficulty.
Yeah, when you send our Sahaba to certain tribes that converted, like were newly converts, that were like one of the recurring themes that Rasulullah kept emphasizing is like, be easy with them, be easy with them,
SubhanAllah, I heard about that. Also, as in random example, the bloke that slept with his wife during Ramadan, and then
this example I sent in the first day of Ramadan.
He was smiling by the end of it, and he's like, go feed poor people as expiation.
And he
like,
said, I have no money.
There's no one poorer than me. And he's like, all right. He's like, then take these dates. Probably gave him dates, like, go feed your family, right? So he had nothing. And then at the end, the Prophet was smiling, like, wow, look at his situation. And then he made it as easy for him as possible, right? SubhanAllah. That just goes to show.
He was fast 60 days. He's like, I can't fast.
I can't fast 60 days. There you go. Like, I can't fast 60 days.
Go and feed, go and free a slave. I can't afford to free a slave.
Yeah, I don't have a slave. Yeah.
It's like, well, go and feed people. I can't afford to feed
There's
people.
no one poorer than me.
And then he's like, well, go. And then the Prophet ﷺ, it says that he laughed. He laughed to himself. He joked. He said, here, take these dates and give them to your family. And that was his expiation.
That's crazy, subhanAllah.
Imagine that. Where are you going to find that now? Where are you going to find that now?
Yeah.
And then, do you know what the consequence? Like I said, do you know what the consequences are? This is not an abstract conversation. It's not bloody. If we do something bad might happen, guys. People do not, and this is a problem. Okay, I'm a traditionalist. Yeah, I identify as a trad bro.
Yeah.
Cool. One of the problems with other trad bros that I've seen is that they ivory towered. They're just locked off, man. They bury their heads in the sand and they're like, oh, look at all these people doing bad things. It's like, you don't engage with these people doing bad things. Yeah. What are you doing about it? Nothing. You're making them feel worse about it.
Yeah.
You're ostracizing them further. That's what the quote unquote trad bros do, bro. And then when you have things like certain language and certain dress that you're portraying as this is Islam, that alienates people as well because they're like, that feels strange to me. That's not relevant to me. And then on top of that, this is the point I'm going to make. It's like climate change, bro. Everyone's out here debating over this piece of land and this policy and this tax and geopolitics. Meanwhile, the world is like slowly going to shit. Like we're all going to burn alive in 100 years. I don't even know what it is, but it's happening, yeah? And if anyone who has like 2-bit logic and reads a graph and doesn't hasn't sacrificed their brain to Murdoch, understands that this is real and this is happening. So what's the point of the debates and discussions we're having in the meantime when our actions are deliberately causing our destruction and suffering?
Facts.
Why are we doing that? So when we have conversations about this, do you understand what the consequences are? Do you understand what's happening to the younger generation of Muslims? Do you understand how many Muslims there are? Just how many Muslims there are as a percentage of our community growing up here who have no affiliation whatsoever with the deen. And they find it cringe and they're alienated by it. And they see it as something that is a burden. They despise it. They hate it. They have bad relationships with their family because of it. This is not a theory. And if you go up and you be like, no, everything's fine, then you're sheltered. You're not out there.
Yeah, you're talking about the born Muslims.
Yeah,
that aren't
if you're
practicing.
like, I'm talking about born Muslims who aren't practicing, to be clear.
Because they don't feel
and
that
if you're
relevance,
one of the,
right.
if you're listening to this being like, no, everything's fine, bro, what are you talking about? Then you're sheltered AF.
Yeah, that's 100%.
You have no clue what's going on out there. You go out there, you try and find as many Muslims as you can our age. And you probably won't, because you probably have to go to a lot of haram places to find them.
Yeah, because 80% of them, 100%, most of them, I reckon.
Yeah, most of them, bro.
Yeah, most of them.
There's been polls done, man. No one cares, bro. The youngest generation, the amount of Muslims I see who despise, born Muslims I see who despise their own deen, who have problems with their family because of it. Every second family I know, there are one or numerous kids like that. And there is absolutely nothing being done about it. And in the meantime, it's just going to keep trickling. And what, you're going to save the deen by locking yourself away and hiding and pretending that it's not? Well, okay, you know what? Trad bro, maybe you will be able to ivory tower and ostracize yourself and cut yourself off and keep this little bubble of purity. But how are you going to ensure that for the next generation? So, how are you going to ensure it for the generation after that? Eventually, it's going to catch up to you, bro. The unstoppable tide of Western, the secularism and hostility towards Islam will eventually catch up with your progeny.
I think sometimes when it comes to specifically the trad bros, usually we see from them, they already had some sort of affiliation with Islam through family in the past. They already had that sort of middle class upbringing anyway.
Exactly.
So they've already lived life in a sort of, in a way where it's more conducive to, I guess, Islam in some ways in its foundation. Like from my own example, right? So, we're Muslim, obviously. Alhamdulillah, like my parents really pushed me to do well in excelling in education. So I already had, a leg up in many ways, But I guess a lot of trad bros emerge from that sort of similar background, and it becomes easier for them, and that's why they're more within the, I guess, they call it the knowledgeable cliques within the community, right? Not obviously, I'm not saying it's it's always panning out like that, because we know obviously a lot of converts, I don't know, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, or many that obviously rise up above and do really well, mashallah. But I'm talking about in our current, in my sort of specific context in Sydney, where you see that kind of comfortable background anyway, right? But then sometimes when they are in that bubble, as you like alluded to, both of you are like, they sort of look down in other, people who are struggling, etc. But I guess that's because, they try to stay in that bubble of purity. But then we know, for example, it's almost that kind of classist outlook. And for me, that's why it was like an eye-opener, really. I'm looking, for example, like, I don't know, Marxist works or anything to that effect, or even feminist works.
Or CRT, bro.
Yeah, all this actually allows me to, like, for example, it's a whole different experience for someone that it's not like, just an example that's coming to my mind is like a person that grew up with both their parents alcoholics, had like, a tough, sort of upbringing, didn't go to the best schools, got bullied and, wasn't given that importance growing up. How do you expect them to just, find Islam, right, or just come to that kind of purity or become that perfect Muslim straight away, right? Because at the end of the day, you're always going to fall back, as you mentioned, I think, Raf, like, something that's familiar of sorts, or what you've known or what you've seen your whole life, right? And so it's always being cognizant of that situation, that kind of, situations that exist within our society, which unfortunately a lot of, the leaders aren't, or people within, trad bro circles aren't privy to, and are very alien.
I want to see how they would answer this question, because I've been put to this question before. Someone came to me and they said, when I drink or when I take drugs, I feel good. I feel better. When I go to pray and when I go to engage with Islam, all I feel is shame and guilt. And now people turn around and they say, well, yeah, that's your fault. Like, you have the wrong aqidah. Like, no, legit, they do. They'll be like, well, you should stop doing the wrong thing and you won't feel guilt. Like, you won't be shamed.
Let's go.
Can you imagine that, bro? Can you actually imagine that? You're basically, how is this attitude that you guys have described that we've put into words now? How is that any different from a white guy? Me coming in and being like, hey, we don't need to change the system. What do you mean racial inequality? There's no racial inequality, bro. I have a friend who's this. I have a friend who's this. Bro, we don't need to change anything. There's no racism. That's exactly the same attitude.
They wouldn't give a shit about racism. They'd be like, oh, they'd probably be racist themselves. They'd be like, oh, what do you mean Islamophobia? There's no Islamophobia. Make it a Muslim thing and they'll care.
That's it. No, but my point is like the attitude of like, these people brought it upon themselves. Or these people should know better.
You say that.
Or
that
attitude,
you Muslims brought it on yourselves. Why are you terrorists?
Yeah.
And then see what they say.
It's the same thing, bro.
You know how that, you know, that remind me of, might be off topic, but you know how when the whole Corona situation popped up, they were like Muslims like, haha, that's like the Chinese, you know, they're getting taste of their own medicine because of the Uyghurs, right? And next minute, it's like the whole world being affected.
You're playing God. Like, you can't make
but there's so many
like
Muslims that like they just jump to the kind of conclusion. But now it's like it all messed us up.
Why is the Middle East effed up? Like, is Allah giving them a taste of their medicine? Like, no. It's like, what the hell? Like, we don't. We believe that's a purifying thing, right? So it's like, you can't draw this divine cause and effect. It's pretty weird.
Exactly.
It's pretty weird. I don't know.
You know what you say to that. It's like,
a lot of tribers are quick to do it.
So when
quick, they just play. They're almost like God, and then they're like, oh yeah, it happened because you had
Chinese finally getting a taste of their own medicine.
Bats aren't even haram in the Maliki madhab.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? That was like like if anything, the racism just came out. If anything, and it was like the sort of because for me, obviously, I didn't know that, but I always hesitate. I'm just like, that's why would you even say that, right? But then I was reading, like, I came across it eventually. I'm like, then, like, are you attacking your own, like, religion? Like, like indirectly, like, it's just out of lack of knowledge. Like,
legit.
They're just exposing themselves in the process, right?
It's that self-righteousness, man. And it's really bad. You can't rationalize. You can't explain why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does something. And if they're going to turn around and be like, oh, yeah, it's their punishment for this. And I hear when we talk about the Middle East and affairs and that have befallen the Muslim world, it's like, oh, yeah, it's because they were sinful. It's because they were bad. It's because they deserved it. So all those Muslims who suffered, it was because they deserved it. All those Muslims who suffered in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and immediately after, it's because they deserved it. Is that what you're saying?
It falls flat on its face.
What is this, bro? That is worse than stupidity. That is worse than stupidity. Honestly, when you say that you know, all right, let me. I'm not going to say it explicitly, but I'll just ask a question. I'll ask a question. If you say you know why God does something, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't specifically say in the Quran. He didn't specifically say, the Prophet ﷺ didn't outline it, but you're saying to me that you know why God has done something. What is that?
Yeah, that's like,
that's
like a...
Yeah. It's not like height of arrogance.
It's like,
bro, not even height of arrogance. I'm implying something.
Like
I'm saying, is it not you saying that you know what God knows?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
SubhanAllah.
It's like it makes no sense.
And that, bro, this is a thing we gotta pre-Maghrib,
yeah.
I think Josh also needs to head off. Like, Maghrib, still a bit of time, but you need to head off, Josh.
Yeah, at a certain point, but it's all good. Like, no, I definitely agree. Just continuing on about trad.
No, look, honestly, like with the trad bro thing, bro, I don't even like using that word because it's like the tradition is something good. It's something I ascribe myself to. I understand that it's said with quotation marks, but even then, like, bro, I spoke to a professor about the quote unquote one of the most knowledgeable Tulab in Sydney, and I asked him, like, what was your impression of him? Yeah, someone who's very understanding of the sociological and political realities on the ground in the Muslim community.
Who'd you ask, right?
I asked the professor.
A professor,
yeah. And I asked him about a talib who's very much a quote unquote trad bro, but he's like the Chad trad bro. Like he's the
I know you're talking about it. Go on.
He's the alpha trad bro. This guy is he's more knowledgeable than most shuyukh. Now the thing is, I asked him and he said, this guy's value is unquestionable. His sincerity is unquestionable. His knowledge is unquestionable. But he needs to get down. He needs to strip off and get into the mud pits with everyone else. Start wrestling, you know? Come and understand what it's like down here. It's all well and good to have all this knowledge and all this understanding, but if you just go and you isolate yourself somewhere, is that really what we ought to be doing? And some people say, yeah, at the end of times, you know, you run for the hill. But first of all, you don't know for sure it's the end of times. And what do people do? Like,
you need to help people who are still stuck here in the mud. Yeah.
That's it. Is that not an obligation upon you?
Yeah,
Is
it
that
is.
not even
That's
is it
community, right?
Sorry, no random thought, but because we've talked about feminism a lot on the podcast, right? I realized like some time ago, I haven't had a chance to mention it. You see a lot of trad bros be anti-feminist. One of the reasons I realize now, because like 6 years ago, I think I had a similar mindset, is that because you talked about day of judgment, end of times, right? They think because they see the hadith of women aren't gonna obey their husbands anymore towards the end of times. They see these like hadith, right? And they kind of bring it all together like some mosh pit, like
mosh pit?
and then mosh pit of how women are so bad like in the end of times, and then they kind of put two and two together like, oh look, feminism is here to misguide women, and so they put like end of times feminism, put it together. It's like a fusion. It's like
the greatest crossover event.
It's like Yu-Gi-Oh, like you got Exodia but the forbidden cards. It's like putting all the hands and the body together. It's like this like beast, like so that's kind of like the rationale. So it's kind of going back to your point. It's like they try to assuming things within tradition. One we just talked about, like already almost knowing what Allah reason why Allah did something or destined something to happen, right? And another context is now like we've already assuming you're saying it's end of times.
How do you know that?
How do you know? You'll never know.
Oh well, there's science.
You'll never be sure.
But we haven't
because
had all
even
the
during the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu Rasulullah kind of there was an impression that like day of judge end of times is nearby, like around the corner, and then there's the I guess hadith about the Dajjal and how they suspected one person within I think it was like a Jewish person or something to be the Dajjal, and Rasulullah asked. It's like there's stuff like that happening at that time, right? And so if they didn't know during the time of the Sahaba, right? How are you saying it's now? Like it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, are you saying things of the ghaib that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a
even
lot of debate
Rasulullah
about
didn't know. Like,
we don't know. It could be.
You could hypothesize. Like, sure, you can play that game.
It could be.
But it's a kind of
I don't
the
know
way they go about it.
that.
It's like almost certain, right? But then how we had this conversation about I guess I don't know, the Abbasids or Umayyads, like this type of stuff they were getting up to, and the stuff that we see now, we're just like, oh look, I don't know, this leader does this, how haram. End of times is near. But then you actually look at Islamic history, but
do you
see
know that there were people who took the title of not of the Rashidin, like the Rashidun Khulafa, right? I'm not talking about them, but I'm talking about some of the Umayyad Khulafa, and people who took the time were like openly homosexual.
Yeah.
Like that's just a fact. Go if you facts not feelings, guys. Where's Ben Shapiro when you need him? I need that audio to be played. Like facts not feelings. Basically, you need to understand that's a fact, and it's like this is not the most depraved era. And my point, bro, when people start talking about feminism, it's like, okay, if you really think, if you're sitting here now with your chin held high, yeah, feminism is the greatest problem plaguing the ummah at the moment, you got a problem, man. And now I'll explain it. Like, it's not to say that there aren't critiques of Western feminism or liberalism or feminism. There aren't critiques from a Muslim perspective on some of the ideas and trends within quote unquote feminism, that you can't have a debate or you can't discuss it, or you can't have an honest and sort of incisive discussion as to what it really means. You can do that. I want to say that. I want to enjoy and partake in this discussion because I think it's an important one. Enjoy and partake in this discussion because it's a very important one. Just like any idea and any movement has something, has a need to be scrutinized. But if you really think feminism is like the vanguard, you're cooked, bro. You know why? Because it is literally like a product of everything else that's happened. It's a product of secularism. It's a product of Europa Universalis. It's a product of all of the... And if you're not talking about that, if you're not focusing on that, if you're not thinking about that, then you got a problem. And then even if you really still want to go into it, ask yourself, why are people going into deviance? Why are people being attracted to that? We talked about it before, yeah? Islam has to offer something to someone. If you ask someone who is a deviant and calls himself a feminist or a liberal or whatever, a Marxist, now not to say that those things necessitate or precipitate deviance in and of themselves. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is if you go and approach someone who happens to be a deviant and happens to ascribe to any of those aforementioned sort of movements or ideologies, you know what they'll say? They'll look you in the eye and they'll tell them, this thing here is making dignifies me, fights for my rights, or is a movement that is for my rights and my benefits and my privilege, like so I can have some parity established. And if people are feeling that way, one sheikh, I remember he was talking about it. He was literally like, there was a divorcee or a divorcee in England who couldn't feed her child, and she made a plea at a conference to have her for donations so that she could buy nappies for her kid and so forth. And the sheikh was so angry, he got up. He's like, "This is fard kifaya for the community to provide for this woman in a time of need. This is fard kifaya." And you know what he said next? He's like, "Oh, and you all wonder why she's gonna go to the human rights." And he's literally said like human rights, right? Like he's like, you wonder why she's gonna go to human rights. You wonder why she's gonna go to the feminists. You wonder why she's gonna go to the liberals, huh? When what are you guys doing for her? How are you guys? Oh, you know, Islam offers you rights. Well, are you offering them?
Big facts.
We see during the time of like the Sahaba, subhanallah, when the Muhajirun, did emigrated to Medina, and you see Sahabi was saying, I will split half my wealth, I'll give you half my garden, I'll even give you my wife, because what happened was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam paired the Ansar with the Muhajirun in order to acclimatize and get to know each, the different tribes, essentially the different people, so to get to know each other well. And subhanAllah, like how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it with a lot of wisdom and paired people up, because according to their similar sort of where they are, if they were business people or working class, etc. And so he used that sort of hikmah to pair people up. And one of them was paired up with another person because, they didn't have much because they were obviously emigrating, right? He was basically to him, I'll give you half my, wealth, half my garden. I'll give you there are two wives, pick one of them. I'll, that kind of giving and love, right? And you see also examples where the Aus, from memory, were the rich ones compared to the Khazraj. One of the other
Khazraj are farmers.
Farmers, yeah. So essentially, it's like the Aus were like, giving a lot to the Khazraj, and the Khazraj are like, I'm worried that, we might not get like the reward because they're giving us so much. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because like, will they get all our rewards as well? All the good deeds, because like they're just giving us so much. So you see that sort of attitude, subhanallah, right? And we see with it also the Ahl Sufa, how the people, I think it was the Ansar, were like, giving, I think, a certain amount of their dates that they made or produce throughout the day. And, I think they made some string that connected it to the Ahl Sufa in order for them to get that amount of, food, portion in that sense. And it's just, you just see it like littered everywhere. Obviously there's other many immense examples, right? And it's just such a fabric in our deen, in our religion, right? And so it was just, that just reminded me of the example you gave about the sheikh,
yeah, bro, and this is not some like Islam is a feminist religion speech that I'm giving right now. It's not. My point is quite simply, don't keep banging on about the foreign ideologies. It's the most cringe thing in the world, bro.
It's so cringe.
It's
bro.
so.
I saw on Facebook a lot now.
Oh man, bro! Every time my hand,
bro, liberalism, and they think liberalism is homosexual, so it's like, oh, bro, that kind of.
And they don't know the difference between liberals and they're like the Marxist liberals. It's like, what? Marxism is like a critique of that, bro. Like, it's the silliest thing in the world, man. CRT is a critique of liberalism. Sorry, like. How are you banging on about both of them at the same time? And honestly, like to move on from that, my point is simply that you need to understand, you need to be humble in this. We're taught to be humble, right? We're taught to be reflective and humble. You cannot control what other people do. Allah will not ask you on Yawm al-Qiyamah, what did that person do to you? Huh? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you about your actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you about what you did. And he will ask the idea of fard kifaya, right? The community is responsible for things. The community is responsible for things. And you are responsible for yourself. So stop banging on about things that are not in your control. The military power of the West, so-called West, is stronger than us, man. It's stronger than the Muslim world. There is barely anything in the Muslim world at the moment that can stand up to that ideologically, intellectually, militarily, economically. There's nothing, man. We can't control that though. So what can we control? Genuinely. And at risk of sounding like, Hamza Yusuf and the ilk of the sort of, what can we do about it? Maybe we just change ourselves and change our state. That's not what I'm saying either. I don't want to emphasize personal responsibility above all else and structural change. I think that it's important, and I think that there are certain things we maybe can do to strengthen our understanding of Aqidah and things like that. But at the same time, when there is a problem in your vicinity with someone, maybe being maybe someone who's like embraced a certain ideological, he's gone on ideological bandwagon that is averse to Orthodox Islam, right? Ask yourself, how do we make this person see clearly the benefit of Islam and make them want to belong in this community? That's the question you should ask, not how to refute it. Anyway,
I think Josh
I
looks
liked-
very agitated. Sorry.
I liked what you said before with the people who are involved in these ideologies. They say this dignifies me, this meets my needs, and this gives me this gives me parity. This addresses the oppressions that I face. So, if you're all about it, then show how Islam does that very thing instead of just shooting down these ideologies. All right, do that for whatever till the cows come home, right? Like, as in, shoot it down, critique it, but what does Islam do to meet those needs in its place? Like, can you show that? Mm-hmm. Can you show how the tradition elaborates on this, explains this, addresses this particular suffering that this person is facing, and where in the community is that being established, where they could find that redress, where as like a, I don't know, single mother, like abusive husband, whatever it is, right? It's like they're finding solidarity and with people who call themselves feminists, are they finding with people who call themselves Muslim, right? The community, are they providing her that support? So I think just that, like how you framed it in the very beginning, I think that's sufficient, right? It's like, so what is Islam doing?
So,
and instead of just shutting it down, what are you actually doing to provide that benefit and replacement, right?
So there's a big with the trad bros when it comes to like an actual issue happening in society. It's like, I don't know, like there's not much support being addressed in this specific situation. And when someone says like, I don't know, let's just say in the example of feminism, like, I don't know, we're not, our needs are not being met. And then a trad bro, what happens is like, they'll just be like, instead of saying what Islam can do in this current time for them, they'll be like, Islam empowered women because, 1400 years ago, we were burying female babies, and now, the Rasul stopped that. Like, it's a very like it's abstract, like in that sense, like the way they kind of talk about Islam is very abstract, but it's not like actual physical doing. So there's that disconnect where it's like, you don't need feminism because, we're not burying, we weren't burying babies. We were so revolutionary, like romantic. Islam, like, So it's like that kind of approach, but it's like, but what are you doing for me now? Romantic, like there's that kind of, like, there's that, it goes back to the ivory tower thing. It's like kind of that abstract realm of, oh, look, we did do things in the past, but they don't really, address the now and how Islam can benefit now. And there's that big disconnect. And I find it a recurring theme. And I'm not going to lie, I used to be that guy in like 65 years ago, like that sheikh would be like, we don't need feminism because Islam did this. And I'll be like, see, you don't need feminism because look, Islam, hectic. But like, then, over time, like, wait a minute, like, sort of, there's a disconnect, right?
Bro, that's like the type 1 though. Like that's the basic version. There's more advanced version.
Proving your irrelevance. You prove your irrelevance. You're like, exactly. So you're just a historical artifact.
So it's an antiquated.
It's not even relevant. There you go,
bro. There's other thing though. Like there's another level above that. It's like a more advanced version of that individual where it's like, oh, what do you mean? These rights that you want, these are just Western impositions. This is against
so that's a bit more sophisticated. Let's break that down. Go on.
It's like exactly that. It's like you wanting parity and wanting all these things is just a product of your indoctrination by Western liberalism.
You actually don't need it. You have to be.
Yeah. In fact, you wanting to like, I'm honestly shocked right now that you're not just like resigning yourself to becoming a housewife. Why can't I even see you? Why are you out here? Why are you at uni? Go home. Go home. But that's like another version.
To address that, you have to actually dig into the tradition and be like, okay, so is your reading correct?
Well, bro, even if it is, let's say hypothetically it is, right? It is. I'm not commenting on that, but say it is.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do? Is she gonna be like, you know what?
No, you're onto something.
Thank you.
I've had an awakening right now.
You're right.
It's those words just like
nah. But you know what? That person pats themselves on the back because they're like, I enjoined the good and forbidded the evil.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm allowed to undermine that, right? You know why? Because there's in our deen, in the Sharia, there are specific texts mentioning the fact that why would you enjoin good and forbid evil if it's going to be counterproductive to that person. If I tell someone who's doing the wrong thing like that in that type of way, or why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? You're a bad Muslim. Is that enjoining the good? That person's not going to listen to me. That person's going to see me as a dinosaur. You have to be pragmatic about how you enjoin good and forbid evil if you're actually going to do it. But instead, bro, it's not about that. It's not about pragmatism. It's not about enjoining good and forbidding evil. If you tell yourself that, but you carry on that way, you are self-righteous.
Yeah,
it's about yourself.
You flexed your self-righteousness. Yeah. That's it. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You've made an impact, right?
You know what? I'm going to go shout myself an HSP to celebrate.
Shout myself a heart attack box.
Yeah. But bro, like if you genuinely would, you'd sit there, you'd think about it, be like, how am I going to get this sorted? No one does that, man, because look, a number of reasons. But I think that if I go on any longer, I'm going to rant myself into like exhaustion. So
I think, and Josh has to go. I'll probably wrap it up, but the episode was meant to be about 100. So initially the plan was Josh hasn't been on this on a podcast since like maybe 2 years ago. So he's made a comeback. But then the point was to kind of reflect on our whole journey on Boys in the Cave, because alhamdulillah, like we've passed 100 episodes, but it ended up being this casual convo, and I love these kind of conversations. But inshallah, maybe like next episode we'll actually like what we'll try to do is like reflect on our journey, because it's been 100 episodes, lots of situations and lot of growth during that period, and a lot to reflect on, and the sort of guests we've had. So we'll do that hopefully in the next episode. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Check us out on socials, inshallah. I know we haven't been as active, but like last month or so we actually had 2 episodes released close by, but we'll try to be consistent, inshallah. And yeah, we'll continue providing good content. Nowadays we're doing a bit more internal, because I think we have a lot to give in that regard. So drop us comments and feedback in terms of how you like it, and if you enjoy the style. But yeah, we're definitely looking to get some the standard prominent guests and discuss things, especially locally. We have I'll probably reveal it, but we need to do a sort of revisit of, I want to get the trinity of the Uthman Badr, Muhammad Taba, and Dr. Samir. We need them all back in rotation, and we'll do that in person, inshallah. So like, we've got some plans. We'll try to get them all.
Bro, if you're going to get the Trinity, then you need to get Abdullah Kunde to come and refute the Trinity, as he does.
The quadrivium.
No, he comes.
Quadrivium, bro.
Abdullah Kunde's life's work is refuting the Trinity. So get him down here to refute the Trinity, pun intended.
And then we'll bring in the Yasir we've had for like the 100th time, but yeah, inshallah, like keep us in your du'as, and yeah, message and reach out to us if you have any other suggestions and thoughts. But we'll leave it there. It's Tanzim, Josh, and Rafael signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.